Welcome to another edition of Diplomatic Channel. This week, counterattacks by Israel on Lebanon are threatening to throw a spanner in the works of a peace deal between the United States and Iran. The U.S. President Donald Trump warns Israel, saying, "Don't blow it." What's he talking about, and what could this mean for peace in the Middle East? My guest on the program is Global Policy Advisor Valentine Achum. He'll be speaking to us from The Hague in the Netherlands. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Let's check in on all those other discussions in diplomatic circles, and we'll be right back.
On the airside of the cargo terminal of the Murtala Mohammed International Airport, an Air Peace aircraft stands silent and still, a quiet witness to a turbulent journey. Its engines, having finally cooled, mark the end of a long flight from uncertainty to sanctuary. One after the other, 258 Nigerians with children file out, escaping the escalating shadows of xenophobia in South Africa.
Welcome home again, all of you. So happy to have you back.
From the airside to the tents, here, a delegation of high-level officials from the federal government bring words of hope and encouragement.
Mr. President asked me to welcome you back home. Home is home. And to assure you that he's doing everything possible by way of various reforms to make the home good for all of us.
They may have faced a hard time abroad. The federal government is keen to see them integrate back home.
Here on ground, courtesy of MTN, 100,000 naira transfer to every one of them, 50,000 naira airtime because they need to communicate. All they have are mainly South African numbers. Crockstone is here to give some cash to them. It's also a private sector real estate firm. We have Governor of Imo State, Governor Hope Uzodimma, who is giving 1 million naira to each of his citizens. So as we get their account and documentation, it will be transferred to them.
NAMA was tasked to transport the returnees back to their various states. So the DG, in our wisdom, made arrangement for transportation for those that are willing to go back to their respective states with adequate security. So,
for many returnees, the South Africa they left behind was not kind to them.
At the initial, I didn't see anything bad, but at last, I was like, I wasted all this 1 year, whole year, without achieving anything.
There's a good people in South Africa. It's not all of them. But most of them, they are very wicked. They are hatred. They don't have human feelings at all. But we thank God that we are back to Nigeria.
The Minister of Foreign Affairs, Bianca Odumegwu-Ojukwu, has visited Nigerians doing time in Ethiopian prisons. She was at the Abba Samuel prison in Ethiopia on Thursday, June 11, a day after announcing the transfer of sentenced persons agreement signed by the two countries. The agreement allows about 100 Nigerians serving jail terms in Ethiopia to be transferred back to Nigeria to complete their sentences. The inmates are mainly held in Abba Samuel and Kaliti prisons. Ethiopian authorities say about 98 inmates could benefit from the transfer deal. The minister, Bianca Odumegwu-Ojukwu, says the Nigerian government will continue to encourage its citizens living and traveling abroad to respect the laws of their host countries and uphold the good name of Nigeria.
The Center for China Studies hosts the June edition of the Chinese Embassy Dialogue with experts, academics, and stakeholders converging to discuss areas of mutual cooperation. Having navigated the challenges of poverty and environmental hazards, the Chinese government, through its embassy, offers to assist Nigerian government to overcome similar challenges. The counselor of the Chinese embassy explains the vision of the leader of the People's Republic of China, Xi Jinping.
The focus of today's dialogue is Xi Jinping, the governance of China series. This volume systematically articulates the core principles essence and the practical requirement of Xi Jinping's thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for new era. They offer important windows into understanding the logic behind Chinese development, governance, and theoretical innovation. For example, the concept of the target poverty alleviation outlined in the books emphasizes precise, tailored measures for each village, household, and individuals. China successfully lifted nearly more than 800 million rural residents out of poverty.
Participants at the dialogue share their thoughts.
From your book, from the book of your leader, that long-term national planning is beyond election cycles because it takes a great deal of time, patience, policy consistency to get each of those ideas that he elucidated so well in the book. If you read the book, you will even see situations where they're tinkering with assumptions slightly as they go along. For the Nigerian situation, we need about 25 to 30 years of natural development framework to survive.
China comes to understand that the only way and manner for peace to reign within the international system is when people are actually exchanged. This brings us to the question of the global civilization initiative, that we shouldn't actually look ourselves as being superior to other peoples, but rather let us share among ourselves, let us accept and appreciate other people's civilization.
As the dialogue session ends, the Councillor, President Xi Jinping, states that China is ready to share its governance experience with Africa and Nigeria, as well as support every country in exploring development pursuant to their own national conditions.
Welcome back. Let's not blow it, US President Donald Trump wrote on his Truth social media handle in response to Israeli forces launching strikes on Lebanon on a day Trump had already announced that the US and Iran would be signing a peace deal. This, although the Iranian government corroborated there is a deal, but as of the day of its signing, they were certain it was not to be on Sunday with the United States. President Donald Trump said the Israeli strikes on Beirut should not have happened. In his words, particularly on a special day when we are so close to a peace deal with Iran. He says Israel has a right to defend itself, but the attack he was responding to was very small and meaningless, and that he and Iran are very close to a deal that will bring peace to the region, including to Lebanon, and all sides should stand down. He then said there should be no more attacks by Israel or any other party, as this could be the beginning of a long and beautiful peace. Iran's chief negotiator, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, said the Israeli attacks on Beirut shows the U.S. is not fulfilling its commitments. But Israeli officials say the conflict against Hezbollah is separate to the one in Iran, and in Israel, there is public support for the war in Lebanon to continue. The U.S. President Donald Trump turned 80 on Sunday, June 14, becoming now the oldest person to be elected U.S. president. Russian President Vladimir Putin held a phone call with him on Sunday, during which he congratulated him on his birthday and discussed bilateral relations between Moscow and Washington. The U.S. president once again called for an end to the war in Europe. And Trump and Putin also agreed that U.S. envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner would visit Russia again in the near future. Putin told Trump that if Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky wants a meeting, he should come to Moscow, an offer that Zelensky has consistently rejected. Well, speaking of Zelensky, Trump also held a conversation with the Ukrainian president, who also congratulated him on his birthday. Zelensky later said both agreed they would discuss more during meetings at the upcoming G7 summit. Now, the focus of our conversation today is the peace deal between Iran and the United States and what happens now that Israel has carried out those airstrikes on Hezbollah in Lebanon. Joining me now to discuss this is a global policy advisor, Valentine Achum. He's at The Hague, from where he joins us. Valentine, thank you for joining us on Diplomatic Channel.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And we have been following, this fine dance between the United States and Iran as regards, Iran's nuclear program, and then the airstrikes have been going back and forth We saw more of that in this week that passed. And then at the end of the week, right before this interview, President Donald Trump said that Iran will most likely be signing a deal on Sunday, although Iran says, well, there is a deal, but they're not sure about the deadline when exactly it will be signed. So, what do you think? Is the president preempting a deal with Iran, or is there really one on the table?
Okay, so thank you for having me again. So as of today, no deal exists yet. I was hoping that before I finish morning mass today, I would have seen PDF documents of the agreement, or at least photo ops all over the internet. But I reckon that there are lots of sticky issues that must be causing the delay. To start with, both the US and Iran have not yet resolved fundamental disagreements, on the terms for the Strait of Hormuz, as well as for other issues such as Iran's nuclear program, sanctions, and even for Lebanon. You would recall that there has even been back and forth over the timeline as well as for financial details in the deal. Disagreements on signing timelines, just like we witnessed today and other days, where we heard President Trump message that the deal is scheduled to happen this morning. But Iran, on the contrary, their foreign affairs spokesman mentioned that it will not be today, citing in fact that the US has been inconsistent, as a major reason for caution. And Iran says that the signing is possible maybe another day. I don't know how long that day is going to be. But beyond the timing, there are significant differences, over the deal's actual content. Court disputes over, key terms such as control and fees for the Strait of Hormuz are critical issues. The US wants a reopening of the Strait of Hormuz immediately without Iran's, tolls or service fees. But Iran is saying that, look, we intend to charge service fees for ships passing through the Strait of Hormuz because they see themselves as their protection over the Strait of Hormuz is unquestioned and indefinite.
So we're recording this on Sunday before, Diplomatic Channel airs on Monday. And I'm reading, what the Iranian chief negotiator says about the deal as of today. He says there's no point in continuing the talks after the strikes, accusing Washington of failing to honor its commitments. So clearly, Iran has taken itself off the table for this deal because of those airstrikes by the Israeli forces. Do you think that they'll be willing to come back to the table sometime in the near future? Or I mean, really, no one can predict, what happens between the U.S. and Iran. I know, but with Iran just saying, one of the conditions for the ceasefire is for Israel to stop attacking Lebanon. Israel continues attacking Lebanon and says, no, this is not part of your deal. This is a separate, discussion we're having with Lebanon and Lebanese authorities who have called out Hezbollah, which is, the group that Israel claims it is targeting in Lebanon and in Beirut and so on, but Iran feels affected by it. Um, what do you think will happen now? Is that deal up in the air, or will the fighting continue? I also want to bring up, that some analysts believe that Iran might draw out this war until President Trump's tenure is over next year.
Okay, yeah, concerning that, you already know that the US and Iran are not, perfectly aligned, on this matter, despite their somewhat corporate bombardments of Iran. And if you recall, Iran has actually suffered a lot, Iran has over 24,000, kinetic events has taken place in Iran just between US and Israel alone. US has probably done about 11,000 strikes on Iran. And, Israel has done probably the same number on Iran. Iran has about 31 provinces, and 29 of its 31 provinces have been bombarded ruthlessly by both US and Iran. And the funny thing is that both US and Iran want different things. For Netanyahu, he wants to completely dismantle Hezbollah. But for Trump, Trump wants to make a deal with Iran to get the oil flowing and then bring, the troop back home. What does that tell you? That on one hand, U.S. plan to seize the oil is like a maximum pressure tactic, or you might call it a negotiating ploy, to force Iran to the table in order to agree to nuclear non-proliferation, which is a legitimate U.S. national security interest. But on the other hand, Trump is not just threatening to destroy the oil. He is threatening to occupy, to control, and to do business.
The U.S. president has talked about, acquiring Iran's oil, just like he did with Venezuela. And, I'm wondering, is it to Iran's advantage or to the Middle East's advantage or just to the U.S. advantage that he does that? I mean, if he gets hold of Iran's oil, that really doesn't benefit the people of Iran. Neither does it benefit the people of the region. It's all to America's advantage, right?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's ultimately to America's advantage. But, the deal which America is proposing is framed into three different phases. There is phase one, phase two, and phase three. The phase three of the deal, as what America is projecting, which Iran doesn't believe America, is that Iran will then be accepted as a threshold state, with no bomb, but retained civilian nuclear capability under strict IAEA oversight. So to Iran, this looks like a surrender disguised as a deal, because Iran's entire regional strategy since the late 1970s has been based on asymmetric power, proxies, missiles, and nuclear potential. So giving Iran this deal is more or less like making Iran, remember, it's not just about the oil. For Iran, it's not just about the oil. It's actually about control. It's about their proxies. It's about the potential. Many people don't know that Iran doesn't really have a nuclear power yet. It's within the realm of potential. So for US, what US is really interested about, the core aspect of US interest in Iran, is the oil. Making business from Iran's oil, essentially, because they know that Iran hasn't really developed a nuclear power yet. But Iran is simply saying that, look, this deal that you're framing to us is more or less like, you're taking our power away, our power of proxies, our power of our networks, our power of our potential to be able to develop nuclear power. So basically, US is simply inviting Iran to be like a normal petrostate, just like a Saudi Arabia, or a UAE. What Iran is saying that, look, that is just, a trick in order to dismantle us, in order to penetrate us, and in order to demobilize, our power that we've garnered over the years.
I'd like to talk about Iran's neighbors and its nuclear program, which of course is a sore thumb for the United States and also for other countries in the Middle East. So they do not want Iran to develop a nuclear weapon or develop nuclear weapons. Neither does the U.S. There's no telling how it will be used. They feel that Iran having access to nuclear weapons, if they do develop nuclear weapons, will be used to, of course, be directed at Israel first of all, and then, before it gets on to the United States and so on. But these other countries, in the Middle East still also have a problem with Israel's existence. They're not friends of Israel. They're just, in international relations, you say there are no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, but permanent interests. And that exactly is what exists. But they also have much fear about, Iran getting hold of nuclear weapons. How did Iran become such a threat to these countries? I mean, I haven't heard any one of them speak out in support of Iran, and they really haven't spoken out in support of Israel. I think they're just developing a stand and see approach as to what happens in the Middle East, who eliminates who, and who eventually has power and control.
So this is a very important question and observation, Amarachi. And I must say, these are questions people dare to ask. In fact, you have touched on a central contradiction that are in the undercurrents of Middle Eastern security situation. The fact that Israel has nuclear weapons, but Iran does not, like I mentioned earlier. This may sound obscure, but in order not to make this sound more nebulous than it already is, let me highlight the baseline facts. So Israel's nuclear status is that it is an undeclared nuclear weapon state. Even though reports have estimated Israel to have between 80 to 400 nuclear warheads, there is so much ambiguity to it, as they neither confirm nor deny it. Of course, that is actually their foreign policy posture. It may also interest you to know that Israel has never signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And because they never signed the treaty, it is not legally bound by its restrictions or by inspections by the International Atomic Energy Agency, okay? But Iran, on the other hand, has a nuclear status of a non-nuclear weapon state, although there is no official confirmation of existence of nuclear warheads in Iran, like I rightly mentioned before. It maintains that its uranium enrichment program is only for peaceful purposes. They are signatories, of course, of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and recently has, not recently, as many times, unfortunately, been found culpable. Not culpable is not the right word. They have been found non-compliant with inspection requirements because, they repeatedly failed to declare, nuclear material and denied inspectors coming from the IATA, to inspect their nuclear site.
Right.
But in all of these, the empirical reality is clear, which is the fact that Israel has the bomb, but Iran does not. Yet they fear the sanctions, the military strikes, and the diplomatic pressure are all aimed at Iran and not Israel. And why is this so? I have about 4 main postulations that explains this. The first reason is what I like to call the existential threat narrative. In this case, the single most powerful driver of fear towards Iran is not its capability, and I mentioned this earlier, because its nuclear capabilities are unproven. It remains within the realms of potential, not capability, all right? Hence, the main driver of fear towards Iran is its declared intentions, which, like I said, falls within the milieu of potential and not power.
Iran is a sponsor of Hezbollah, which is what many of the countries in the Middle East already know. International organizations and all that already acknowledge, that Hezbollah is a terrorist organization. Their goal, of course, is the annihilation of Israel. Do you think that, this deal between the US and Iran could be hindered, basically could be hindered because of Israel's war with Hezbollah, which is its target in Lebanon, which is why it is targeting several parts of Lebanon, because it is seeking out these terrorists? Do you think that the deal between the United States and Iran could be affected by Israel's decision to continue with the war against Hezbollah, despite, whatever is America and, Iran are talking about? Israel is fighting a different war, and that is the war against Hezbollah and other terrorist groups in the Middle East that want Israel no longer to exist, want to bring down the Israeli government and so on. And Israel is constantly at war with these groups.
Israel is simply saying, look, we need to completely dismantle Hezbollah. But US just wants to do business, actually. Israel just wants, US wants control over Iran's oil, and to bring Iran back to be a petrodollar state, just like, a Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. And they're threatening Iran that if they refuse, they will take their oil fields by forcing them. They will take their oil fields and basically, doing just what they did to Venezuela, but for Israel, like I said, they want a completely different thing. They've seen a very critical threat coming out from Iran. And all they're saying is, we have to dismantle those threats of having nuclear weapons, threat of, their various proxies around the Ring of Fire, which threatens not just Israel's, national security, but the Ring of Middle East generally.
Well, we have many days ahead of us to watch the developments, and I'm sure that the week will be a very eventful one. Valentine, thank you for taking a stab at many of my questions and for bringing us, detailed research, especially on the Iran issue and its existence in the Middle East and its acquisition of, or its proposed acquisition of nuclear weapons. Thank you again for speaking with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Amarach.
And this is where we end the program this week. I'm Amarachi Ubani. I'll see you next time.